Coming to the christening, Mom. That was the voicemail. Not even a text. A voicemail, left at 11:47 on a Tuesday night while I was asleep. I stood in my kitchen the next morning in my robe, holding my phone, listening to my son's voice say those words like he was canceling a dentist appointment. Calm, rehearsed, like he practiced it a few times before he got the nerve to press record instead of call. I set the phone down on the counter next to my coffee mug. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. I just stood there and looked out the window at the bird feeder I'd hung in the backyard 30 years ago, back when this house was full of noise and little shoes by the door, and someone always needing something. Then I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip, and started thinking. My name is Carol. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as an office manager for a pediatric dental practice in Columbus, Ohio, which means I spent 3 decades keeping complicated things organized, managing people who didn't always get along, and making sure that no matter what happened behind the scenes, everything ran smoothly on the outside. I retired 2 years ago, and I thought that was going to be the hardest adjustment of my life. I was wrong. My son is Jason. He's 34. I raised him by myself after his father left when Jason was 9. There's no dramatic story there. His father just decided he wanted a different life, and we weren't in it. He moved to Phoenix, remarried, had 2 more kids. Jason and I managed. We more than managed. We were close in the way that people who've been through something hard together tend to be close. Not perfect, not without our arguments, but solid. At least, I thought we were solid. 3 years ago, Jason met Felicia. I want to be careful here because I've had a lot of time to think about this, and I don't want to be the kind of woman who blames everything on her daughter-in-law. That's too easy, and it isn't entirely fair. But I also have to be honest, because that's the only reason I'm telling this story at all. Felicia came from money. Old money. The quiet kind. Her family had been in real estate in Cincinnati for 3 generations. Her mother, Renee, was the kind of woman who could make you feel underdressed in your own living room without saying a single word about your clothes. She had opinions about everything, where the wedding should be held, what kind of invitations were appropriate, who sat where at the rehearsal dinner. And somewhere in the process of planning that wedding, my son started seeing his own mother through Renee's eyes. I noticed it first, at Easter, the year before the wedding. Jason and I had a tradition. Nothing fancy, just brunch at my house. The 2 of us, same as we'd done since he moved out. That year he called the morning of and said they were going to Renee and Gerald's lake house instead. He said it casually, like it was obvious. Like of course that's where you'd go if you had the option. I said that was fine. I made myself a plate of scrambled eggs and ate alone. I noticed it again when I wasn't consulted about anything for the wedding. Not asked, not included, not even informed in advance most of the time. I found out the venue had been chosen when Jason mentioned it in passing during a phone call about something else. I found out the date the same way. When I asked about helping, flowers, the rehearsal dinner, anything, Renee had already handled it. Or Felicia had a vision. Or it just wasn't necessary, Mom, we've got it. I should say this clearly, I paid for part of that wedding. Not a small part. Jason came to me 8 months before the date and explained that the venue deposit was due and they were a little short. Could I help? Of course I could help. I was his mother. I wrote a check for $4,200. 2 months later, he came back. The catering quote had come in higher than expected. I wrote another check for $3,800. By the time the wedding happened, I had contributed just over $9,000 to an event where I was seated in the 3rd row on the groom's side, behind 2 of Felicia's aunts I had never met, and where Renee gave a toast that thanked everyone by name except me. Jason and Felicia had been married 18 months when Felicia got pregnant. I cannot describe what I felt when Jason called to tell me. It was the first time in over a year that I'd felt like myself around him. I cried, he cried a little, we laughed about it. He said, "You're going to be a grandmother, Mom." I said, "I already feel like one." We stayed on the phone for an hour. I started planning immediately, not in an overbearing way. I knew better than to presume. but I had a cedar chest in my bedroom that had been my mother's, and I started putting things in it. A soft blanket I knitted over 4 evenings, a small stuffed rabbit I found at an estate sale, the kind with real button eyes and a worn velvet ear, a copy of Goodnight Moon that had been Jason's when he was small, still with the coffee stain on the back cover from when he'd knocked my mug off the nightstand at age 4. I bought a plane ticket to Cincinnati for the weekend of the christening without being asked, because I genuinely, honestly assumed that of course I would be there. I booked a room at the Hampton Inn 2 miles from their house. I sent Felicia a message asking if she needed anything, if there was anything I could bring, if she wanted me to arrive Friday, or if Saturday morning was better. She left the message unread for 4 days. Jason called on a Tuesday night at 11:47 p.m. and left a voicemail instead of talking to me and said I wasn't coming to the christening. There were reasons given, or rather, there was one reason given. In a follow-up text Jason sent the next afternoon after I didn't respond to the voicemail, he said the christening was going to be small, intimate, just close family and their church community. He said he hoped I understood. He said Felicia had been really stressed and they were trying to keep things simple. I read the text twice. Then I opened my calendar app. Here's what Jason didn't know or didn't think about or simply forgot: I had booked the party venue. Let me explain. About 4 months earlier, when the baby was still on the way, Jason had called me in a momentary lapse of including his mother and mentioned that they were thinking about having the christening at a local venue because their apartment was too small for everyone. Felicia's family would want to invite. He mentioned the name of the place, Clover Hill Events, a garden venue about 20 minutes from their apartment. He said they'd toured it and loved it but hadn't booked anything yet. I, being who I am, organized, efficient, a woman who spent 31 years making sure things didn't fall through the cracks, offered to call and book it for them as a gift. Jason said, genuinely touched, "Mom, you don't have to do that." I said, "I know I don't have to." I called Clover Hill Events the next day. I spoke to their coordinator, a very pleasant woman named Sandra. I booked the outdoor terrace for a Sunday afternoon. I put down a deposit of $800 with my credit card. I arranged for a catering package, the brunch tier, which included mimosas, a fruit display, past appetizers, and a full egg station for 40 guests, with a balance due 2 weeks before the event. Everything was in my name, my credit card, my contact information, my signature on the contract. When Jason sent that text telling me I wasn't invited, he had apparently forgotten all of this. I sat with that information for a while. I am not a vengeful person by nature. I want to be clear about that. I'm not someone who plots or schemes, but I am someone who, after 31 years of being a single mother, after writing nearly $9,000 in checks for a wedding where I wasn't thanked, after being left off the christening guest list for a party that I had personally booked and paid the deposit on, I am someone who, when pushed far enough, gets very, very quiet and very, very organized. I called Sandra at Clover Hill Events. I explained that I was the account holder and that there had been a change in plans. I asked about the cancellation policy. Sandra told me that cancellations made more than 10 days before the event resulted in a full refund of the deposit. The event was 22 days away. I said, "I'd like to make some changes to the booking, actually, not a cancellation. Is that possible?" Sandra said yes, of course. What did I have in mind? I told her I'd be in touch within the week. Then I called my friend Beverly. Beverly and I have been friends since our kids were in the same 3rd grade class. She's been through 2 divorces, 1 bout of breast cancer, and a son who moved to another country without telling her until he was already there. Beverly does not rattle easily. I told her what happened. There was a long silence. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I'm going to take a few days," I said, "and then I'm going to figure it out." "I'll come with you wherever you need to go," she said. "You know that." I did know that. I called Jason 3 days later. I had thought very carefully about what I wanted to say, and I said it clearly and without crying, which took effort. I told him that I heard his voicemail and that I'd received his text. I told him that I was hurt in a way I didn't have adequate words for, not just about the christening, but about the pattern I'd watched develop over the past 3 years. I told him that I had tried to be understanding, tried to give him space, tried to respect his marriage without disappearing from his life entirely. I told him that I had written $9,000 in checks for a wedding where no one thought to thank me, and I had done it without complaint because I loved him. I told him that I had booked the christening venue in my name as a gift and that I was the account holder on the contract. Then I asked him a simple question. Did you forget that I booked Clover Hill? The silence on the other end of the line was long enough that I counted to 11 in my head. Mom, he started. I'm not asking you to choose between me and Felicia, I said. I'm asking you to be honest with me about whether this is a decision you made together or a decision that was made for you, because those are two very different things. He didn't answer that question. He said he would call me back. He never did. 12 days before the christening, I called Sandra at Clover Hill Events, and I transferred the booking. I didn't cancel it. I changed it. I moved it to Beverly's daughter's baby shower. Beverly's daughter, Claire, was 8 months pregnant and had been planning a small shower with no real venue. The dates worked perfectly. I changed the guest count, adjusted the catering package, updated the contact information. I transferred every detail. The $800 deposit stayed applied to the new booking. The remaining balance would transfer to Beverly's family instead. Then I did something I had never done in my 63 years of life. I booked myself a trip. Not a long trip, not extravagant. I found a 4-night stay at a small inn on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, a place I had always wanted to go and kept putting off because there was always something else, always someone who needed something. The total cost was $620. I booked a window room that looked out over the water. I packed a bag with 3 novels, my knitting, and a good rain jacket, and I drove there on a Thursday afternoon with the radio on and the windows down. I did not tell Jason I was going. I did not tell Felicia. I did not respond to anyone in that family for 4 days. On the Saturday of the christening, I was sitting on a wooden chair on my balcony at the inn, wrapped in a blanket, watching the water. The fog was coming in low and slow over the sound. I had a mug of tea. I had finished 1 novel the night before and started another that morning. I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happy exactly, but still settled. My phone started ringing at 10:14 a.m. Jason. I let it go to voicemail. Then again at 10:31. Then at 10:41. Then at 10:45. Then a number I didn't recognize, which I also let go. Then Beverly, who I answered because Beverly doesn't call unless it matters. They showed up at Clover Hill, she said, and I could hear her trying not to laugh. 40 people, caterers nowhere. Coordinator says the booking was transferred weeks ago and she has paperwork to prove it. Jason is calling you. He's trying, I said. What do you want to do? I want to finish my tea, I said. And then I might take a walk on the beach. Beverly laughed then fully. Good, she said. Good for you, Carol. By the time I drove home Sunday evening, I had 14 missed calls from Jason. 3 from a number I eventually identified as Felicia's mother, Renee, and 1 from a number that turned out to be Felicia's older brother, a man named Scott, who I had met exactly twice at the wedding and who I would not have expected to hear from under any circumstances. I listened to Jason's voicemails first. They went in order: confused, frustrated, accusatory, and then, somewhere around the 7th one, something that sounded like it might eventually become remorse. He said he didn't understand why I'd done this. He said I'd embarrassed Felicia in front of her entire family. He said we needed to talk. I listened to Renee's message, which was clipped and cold, and informed me that what I had done was unacceptable and manipulative, and that she expected an apology. Then I listened to Scott's message. Scott said, "Carol, this is Scott, Felicia's brother. I know we don't know each other well. I just wanted to say that I heard what happened today, and I also heard what happened before it, with the wedding. With the voicemail Jason left you. I have a mother too, and I'd be ashamed if anyone treated her the way you've been treated. I'm sorry you went through that. I don't have any business getting in the middle of this, but I just wanted you to know that not everyone in this family thinks what happened to you was okay. That's all. Take care of yourself." I listened to that message 3 times. Then I sat down at my kitchen table in the same house where I'd raised Jason alone for 25 years, and I let myself cry. Not from sadness exactly. From something more complicated than that. From the relief of being seen by someone who had no obligation to see me at all. I called Jason the next morning. I told him I was ready to talk, and that I needed him to be ready to actually listen. Not to manage me, not to smooth things over and move on, but to listen. We talked for 2 hours. It was hard. There were things he said that stung, and things I said that I had to slow down and reconsider mid-sentence. But somewhere in that second hour, something shifted. He told me that he had known, somewhere underneath everything, that the way things had been going wasn't right. He said that it had been easier to go along than to push back. He said that he was sorry, not in the quick way people say sorry to end a conversation, but slowly, like he'd been holding it for a while. I told him sorry was a beginning, not an end. I told him that I wanted to know my grandchild. That was the part that mattered most. Everything else, the money, the christening, the voicemail, all of it could be worked through, could be forgiven in time. But I was not willing to be a stranger to that baby. Not after everything. He said he understood. I told him to call me when the baby was home and settled, and Felicia was feeling up to a visit. I told him I would come when I was invited, and not before. And then I said goodbye and hung up. The call from Felicia came 6 days later. It was awkward and halting, and I could tell she was reading off notes at least part of the time. But she called. She invited me to visit the following weekend. She said, with what sounded like genuine effort, that she was glad the baby would know her grandmother. I said I was glad too. I brought the cedar chest, the blanket, the rabbit, the worn copy of Goodnight Moon with the coffee stain on the back cover. I set it in the corner of the nursery while Felicia watched from the doorway. Jason stood next to her with his hand on her shoulder. Then he put the baby in my arms. She had his nose. She had dark hair and very serious eyes, and she gripped my finger with her whole fist and held on. I didn't say anything for a while. I just stood there in that small room with the afternoon light coming through the curtains, holding my granddaughter for the first time, and I thought about my mother, and her mother before her, and every woman who had ever held a baby in a moment like this one, and known that whatever had been broken could not entirely break this. Her name is June, and I will be at every birthday she ever has. I made myself that promise right there in that room, very quietly, just for me. There's a certain kind of love that doesn't ask for anything back. I know that kind of love. I've been practicing it my whole life. But there's also a certain kind of love that finally says, I am worth showing up for. Not just for everyone else. For myself, too. I learned that on a foggy Saturday morning on the Outer Banks, drinking tea on a balcony with my phone full of missed calls, and the water stretched out wide and quiet in front of me. It only took me 63 years. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to finally stop shrinking yourself to fit into a space that was never really made for you. For years I told myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping the relationship. I wrote checks I wasn't asked to write, or rather I was asked, but only when something was needed. Never when something was being celebrated. I sat in the third row at my son's wedding behind 2 women I'd never met. I found out the date of my own grandchild's christening from a voicemail left at midnight, the kind of call you make when you're hoping someone won't pick up. And I kept telling myself, this is love. This is what love looks like when it's hard. But here's what I've come to understand. Slowly, the way you understand most true things. Not all at once, but in pieces. Usually after something breaks. Love that only flows in one direction isn't love. It's a habit. And habits, unlike love, can be unlearned. When Jason told me I wasn't coming to that christening, something in me went quiet, not the quiet of defeat, the quiet of clarity. I had spent 3 years accommodating a situation that kept asking more of me while returning less. And at 63 years old, with a contract in my name and a deposit on a venue I had booked as a gift, I finally asked myself a question I should have asked much sooner. What happens when I stop? What happens when the person who has always absorbed the cost of everyone else's choices simply stops absorbing? I found out, and so did Jason. The choices we make have weight, and that weight lands somewhere. Jason chose, over and over, to let me be moved to the edges of his life. Quietly, politely, but steadily. And the consequence of that choice was not something I imposed on him. It was something that already existed in the logic of his own decisions, waiting. I had signed that venue contract. I was the account holder. I had every right to change it. The collapse of that christening wasn't my revenge. It was just what happens when the person doing all the quiet, invisible work finally steps aside. That's the thing about integrity. It works whether anyone is watching or not. I didn't make a scene. I didn't send an angry message. I packed a bag, drove to the Outer Banks, and let the natural weight of things fall where they were already going to fall. And Scott, a man I had met twice who owed me nothing, called to say that what had been done to me wasn't right. That meant more than any apology could have, because it told me that I hadn't imagined it. That clarity matters. That seeing clearly, even when it's painful, is its own kind of strength. I held my granddaughter June for the first time 6 days after that christening, in a quiet room with afternoon light coming through the curtains. No party, no crowd, no performance. Just me and her and that whole impossible weight of a new life in your arms. It was better than any event could have been. I think that's what I want to pass on to her someday, when she's old enough to understand it, that your dignity is not negotiable, that you can love someone completely and still refuse to disappear for them, that walking away from a table where you are not valued is not cruelty. It is self-respect, and self-respect, practiced long enough, is the only thing that makes real relationships possible. It took me 63 years to learn that. I hope she gets there sooner.